All right, I wanted to go through these scenarios to make sure that you understand how we find our grade. Doing that requires us to look at this table, then using the information from that table. Let's go back. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to circle everywhere Jasmine is on our first grade table, because I'm going to need to use that information in the flowchart. All right, so the first thing I know is she has 12 of her LOs she has proficient. That's going to put her at the C level. I know 12's not on this table, but it isn't 13, so we can't say she's at the B level. So 11 and 12 would count at the C level. She has 1 integrated problem proficiency, so that's at the B level. Her lab average is at 86. She hasn't missed any labs. She has completed 82% of the Smart Book assignments, so that's at the B level. She's completed 82% of the Canvas assignments, that's actually at the A level. And then her averages on Connect for her conceptual assignment, it's 87. And for numerical assignments, it's 88. So we have kind of a spattering of things here. The most important thing that we'll see in the flowchart is where she begins, and that's based on her assessments. And then what we see otherwise is everything else is at the A and B level. We want to keep that in mind as we go to the flowchart. We'll go to the flowchart, and the flowchart actually tells you your grade going into the final. So with the flowchart, we start at the C level because that's what her assessment grade is. And the first question is your grade for every other category in A. Well, we had A's and B's, so we can't answer yes, we have to go no. And the next question is your lowest grade for any other category a B with your highest grade an A? Yeah, that's true. So her performance on the other aspects, that going into the final, she has a C+. Finally, there's a separate table that allows you to see what the possibilities are as you go into the final based on what your final performance is. So let's go to that table. She was at the C+ level, so that means that everything in here is going to apply to her. That is, we started at C+, which is right here, and the different grades that we see, the final's worth 10 points, so if she got a perfect score, she could get a B+. And so you can see that at a 7 out of 10, she maintains her C+ grade. 8 would pull it up to a B-, 9 would pull it up to a B, and 10 would pull it up to a B+. So basically, the best she can do is a B+, but she'd need a 10 out of 10 on the final. All right, so that was our first case. Now we're going to look at a different scenario. Here we have Idris. Idris has 16 of the 17 LOs he has proficient, and he's done 2 of the integrated problems. We're going to kind of go back and forth because of where the stuff is, so let's fill out those first 2 things on the table. He has a lab average of 90%, and he's completed 86% of the Smart Book assignments and 87 of the Canvas-based assignments. So let's go back to the table and account for. When we look at the homework grades, we see that the conceptual assignments and numerical assignments are both 80%. Okay, so that's going to be a little. So he has all of his assessments, and he has 2 integrated problems. So far, so good. All these are really good because they put him all at the A level. Now let's see how he did on his homework. Lower, I think. Yep, those are at the B level. And so hopefully what we're starting to see is, every aspect of the course does play a role. There's a purpose for every one of the assignments. None of it is just should be viewed as busy work, but they're all important to developing the skills that you need. And what we're going to see when we look at our flow chart is that you get credit for working on all these aspects. So we can see that right now his assessment grades are at the A level, and all the other things are either A or B level. So let's keep that in mind as we look at our flow chart. All right, I'm going to start at A for the flow chart because he's done really well on his assessments for his learning objectives. However, he doesn't have an A in every other category, so we have to go down to the next box, which asks if every category is at a B or above. And, well, as a matter of fact, it is. So that means that he has an A minus going into the final. Let's see how he can do on his final exam. Can he pull it up? So if he's at the A minus, we can see that everything in this shaded area would apply to Idris's possibilities. We can see that because he's at the A minus, he can keep it with an 8 out of 10, which he seems to be mastering things pretty well, so that seems reasonable. He could actually pull it up to an A if he got a 9, and of course 10 goes unspoken. That would pull it up to his A as well. So he can get an A in the course. He needs a 9 or a 10 out of 10 on the final. All right, now we're ready for our last scenario. Luca's having a little bit more problems with the course. He only has proficiency in 6 LOs and hasn't gained proficiency in any of the integrated problems. Let's put that on the table on the next page. Let's see. He actually has an 85 in lab, and he hasn't missed any, and he's done well completing SmartBook and Canvas-based assignments. So let's mark those things down. Yep. So the last thing is his conceptual assignments are 85%, and his numerical assignments are 80. So those are the last things. So unfortunately, his level of assessments puts him at the F level, and even though 0 integrated problems, we could say it is a C, but it's also, it's true at all these. Let's see how he did in other things. So he's here and here for the SmartBook and for the Canvas base. We have to fill in. That puts him at the A and the B level. And so this is a really important scenario, the one for Luca, because it stresses the importance of the assessments. You might have been tempted to think that these grades over here are going to pull him up into the passing range, but let's take a look at the flow chart to see if that's actually true. When we see at the flow chart, when you're at the F level for your assessments, we notice there aren't any choices. This is where the assessments take the priority, and it's reflected in this decision. You haven't really learned, or Luca has not learned the material that's expected in this course, and unfortunately, he has an F going into the final. Let's look at the final exam table to see if there's any chance for redemption. We notice that this column right here is what things that apply to his possibilities. And we see that there actually is a possibility, so Luca could pass if he does well enough on the final, he would need 6 out of 10 for a D minus. And actually, if he got a 10 out of 10, he could pull his grade up to a C. So while it is true that he has a chance of passing, it does mean probably he's going to have to work very hard to really learn the material that going into the final he hadn't mastered, based on the fact that he only had gained proficiency in 6 of the learning objectives. So this would be a lot of work to get into that passing level so that he could do well on the final. So I hope that these make sense. It's extremely important that you understand how the grading works, and this was why I made sure that we had an assignment that covered that.